Hello, everyone. My name is Bernard Bull. I serve as Assistant Vice President of Academics and Associate Professor of Education at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And recently I received an email from Judy Wood, who had some questions for me. I understand that you're in a class and you're exploring the role of the online instructor, and that you might be using an article that I wrote a while back about the 8 roles of an effective online teacher. So I offered that I'd be happy to put together a short video and answer a few of your questions, and that's what this is right now. It's certainly an informal, largely unedited video, and I was given just 3 questions to explore with you, and I'll keep this nice and short, but I'll give you just a few thoughts for you to consider and maybe discuss. The first question that was shared in the email was, how does an online instructor encourage or structure engagement and meaningful learning? So engagement and meaningful learning and the role of the instructor. Well, I tend to think that there are really 2 key pieces to effective online teaching and learning. And the first actually starts with before the course actually begins. Sometimes it's the same person who's teaching the course, but other times in online learning, it's increasingly popular to have a team of people that are engaged in building and designing the learning environment, the learning context, the learning experience. And I don't want to disregard that role. That's a really important role in online learning. And it's important for 2 reasons. So first, online learning oftentimes gets a level of planning and strategy behind it, at least when it's at its best, that we rarely see in a lot of face-to-face courses. It's oftentimes and increasingly less a solitary effort of a single instructor just planning and designing and implementing a course, and it's increasingly a team effort. I know I work and I do consulting for organizations around the world on instructional design and online learning and blended learning and educational innovation, and it's increasingly common for teams, sometimes teams of 2 or 3, sometimes teams of 7, 8, or more, where they'll bring in different subject matter experts and educational psychologists, game designers, programmers, videographers, graphic designers, and certainly not every organization is able to do all of this, but I bring it up because these teams gather and they're trying to be incredibly intentional about how they design a learning environment in a way that truly engages, in a way that inspires. So they're leveraging game mechanics, they're leveraging some of the principles of gamification that are out there, they're leveraging concepts around game-based learning, around instructional design, around design thinking, and design strategies, and so forth. And this is really important. So even if a person's a solitary instructor, though, they can tap into these to think about, how am I going to organize the learning environment, and how am I going to help to promote engagement? And we can even go back to really traditional concepts of engagement and of motivation, like the ARCS model: attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. And we can start looking at our course design to think about how we can actually highlight each of those areas. We know, for example, that if we prime or introduce a new topic or subject with some kind of introduction that asks provocative questions, that has novelty, that uses humor, that ties into real-world contexts and experiences, that uses cases and stories, that all of those can be a great way to start to draw a person in. We know that stating our goals clearly can increase motivation and decrease stress and anxiety, which hurts motivation and engagement. We can be explicit in our expectations, but also flexible enough to involve the input of the learners. So all of that happens actually on the design phase. At its best, it usually happens before a course even starts. So that's one answer to the question. Now, the second part, though, is how do we structure engagement and meaningful learning has to do with once the course has begun, once it's been designed. And now we have an instructor that's in the course. Maybe the instructor was the one who was the sole designer, maybe not. But if you have the course designed in advance, it allows the instructor to devote more of his or her time to the learners. If you're building a course as you go, that doesn't happen very easily. I've actually had that happen a few times in my life. I've actually worked as an instructional designer for a number of years, and I worked with a lot of instructors one-on-one. And the instructors who argued that they didn't have the time to prepare in advance, the ones who said, I'm just going to kind of stay a week ahead of the students, or they might argue the content in my field is so continually changing, it needs to be so current that I can't do it before the course starts. Well, those are the ones who often had the greatest struggle with student motivation and engagement. And when you looked at why, it usually had to do with a simple fact. If you're trying to build your course, you don't have as much time for your students. So a key here to engagement is actually having things ready, being organized and prepared so that once the course starts, you can be all there for the students. And that's actually the phase where my article comes in, where I talk about being a coach and a mentor and a tour guide and all of those different things. Those are possible if you have the course largely built and designed in advance so that you can be all there and you can play these different roles as you observe what's happening with the learners. And so that there's a key piece there is just to be a really great observer and to pay attention to the details, be deeply curious about what's happening in the course, what's happening with the learners, who's learning, who's engaged, who's not, what are the signs of engagement or lack thereof, what are the signs of being disconnected or confused or frustrated, and being really proactive about that, looking and at the first sign of it, doing something about it, reaching out to people individually, reaching out to groups, thinking about how you can kind of shift and structure things in the course to adjust for that. So all that becomes really important. Second question, how do the roles of a mentor different from the role of an instructor? Well, one of the challenges we have in education, it's both a joy and a challenge for me, is that every term that we use, it has multiple definitions and multiple meanings, right? Even the word education or course, those are words that are shifting in their meaning all the time. And so the role of instructor versus mentor, you're going to get different answers from different people. But let me give you one of mine, at least how I tend to think about it. The role of instructor, the concept of an instructor, people often think that an instructor's job is to organize the resources, to share the knowledge with the learners, possibly to evaluate the learner's work, to assess whether or not they met the learning goals or whether or not they've progressed in the course, and certainly to organize the content in ways that are meaningful and engaging and so forth. A role of a mentor is quite a bit different, and I'll actually I'll describe it this way. I'll use it sort of, the word coach and mentor in the literature, they have different meanings, but I'm going to put them together for a moment here. Let me share with you just an example from athletics. So the Super Bowl just happened, and in the Super Bowl we have some incredible quarterbacks, right? And quarterbacks can really make or break a team. So let's say we're at the very beginning and we're trying to help the youngest children become the next great quarterback. Well, let's teach them to throw a football. Let's teach them to throw a spiral. So how do you do that? One thing you could do is you could go out there on the field and say, okay, kid, watch me. And you take the ball and you throw a perfect spiral, right? And you do it over and over. And you say, watch me over and over again. And then you look over to the kid and you say, okay, now I'm going to teach you how I did that. And you go step by step and you explain to them how you threw the spiral, what you were attending to in terms of your mechanics, your body mechanics, and everything like that. And you're instructing them, right? Now, mentoring them into being a great quarterback is a completely different mindset and focus. You see, you might say, watch this, I'm going to throw a spiral. You might take a moment to explain to them how you did it, but you're also going to get the ball in their hands, and you're going to have them throw the ball, and you're going to give them ongoing coaching and feedback, and you're going to mentor them, and you're going to guide them in getting better and better. It's personalized, it's individualized, it's focused upon helping each individual make progress toward the established goals in the course, but also and the program, but also toward their personal goals. Mentoring is a deeply intimate process. It can be time consuming. And some people teaching online courses with hundreds of students are not going to be able to be a full-blown mentor. But even if they take the mindset of a mentor and they think about the kinds of questions that lead toward mentoring, like how can I personalize? How can I attend to the unique needs and interests and challenges and abilities? How do I affirm the strengths of each individual and help them use those strengths and build on them to achieve the course goals and beyond? Those are the kinds of questions that we ask as mentors. It's not that instructors don't and can't ask those questions, but the mentor leadership, the literature around mentoring, can help us to think a little bit more like this. Now for the last question, how is mentoring in an online community different than face-to-face mentoring? Well, obviously there are some, it depends upon the nature of your communication online. You can use real-time video, you can use recorded video, you can use real-time audio and recorded audio, you can use asynchronous communication and discussion boards and an email and lots of different formats, right? So that's actually one thing that's different in online mentoring. People tend to use a larger variety of mentoring strategies if they're aware of the possibilities and they think through what are the benefits and limitations of each communication strategy for different purposes. In face-to-face mentoring, it often tends to be a little bit more straightforward. It's one type of communication. The benefit of face-to-face mentoring, of course, is you can build a great sense of rapport when you share a physical space with another person in the room. Oftentimes nonverbal communication and some of those other intangibles are easier to grasp by a person. Online, people have to be a little more systematic and planned out to make it go well. But, I'm not really sure. It varies from context to context. It depends on how you're mentoring a person and for what purpose. But there certainly are differences. What I would say is what's most important in that conversation is not saying one is better or worse, but it's asking the question, what are the affordances and limitations of each? The affordances are the things that are amplified, the benefits that start to come out when you're using mentoring in a certain forum or venue. The limitations are the things that are harder to get across, the things that seem to be more challenging. But as we do that, we really want to dig in and deeply ask, what are the affordances and limitations of this type of mentoring or this form of communication when I'm mentoring? When we do that, we want to find the ability to bracket our own preconceived notions and assumptions of what is and what should be. Because that's one of the challenges that we find in a lot of the literature about online learning in general. People are bringing their preconceived notions to the table, and they're oftentimes missing what's right in front of them. They're missing the fact that online learning and online communication has affordances that face-to-face does not. And then some advocates and some zealous advocates of online learning are missing the fact that online learning has limitations that don't exist in face-to-face, right? So the way we get past that debate and all of that argument is we just get really curious and we ask, what are the affordances, what are the limitations, and be open to the fact that those affordances and limitations will change as the technologies change and as people's skills change. Finally, one more thing. What they have in common between face-to-face and online mentoring is that mentoring is a skill, it's a craft, it's an art, it's also a science. And all of those things take time and energy and practice. You're not able to do it perfectly or be the best in the world the first time you do it. I give this example oftentimes. Imagine a young person sits down at a piano, first time ever. They expect to be able to play Mozart and they can't. They're frustrated after practicing for 10 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, so they stand up and say, the piano doesn't work. Pianos are bad, they're broken. Well, no, it has nothing to do with the piano. It has to do with the fact that you did not engage in ongoing, reflective, and deliberate practice. It takes sweat and tears and hours of work to get good at the piano. The same thing is true for mentoring. The same thing is true for teaching online. If you ask someone, do you know how to drive a car? And they say yes, and you bring up an 18-wheeler, well, that's a different kind of vehicle, and it requires a different skill than driving a traditional car. Or what about driving a race car in a race? Yeah, the same thing is true. Teaching is not teaching. There are different types of teaching, and they each require deliberate practice and time and reflective practice in order to get good at it. That's a real key when we think about online teaching and learning to become an effective mentor. I hope that my answer to your questions was valuable, and I hope that you continue to have a great, rich learning experience.